and the starved and ragged remnant of an army, having retreated across Alabama and Georgia and into Carolina, swept onward not by a victorious army behind it, but rather by a mounting tide of the names of lost battles from either side, Chickamauga and Franklin, Vicksburg and Corinth and Atlanta, battles lost not alone because of superior numbers and failing ammunition and stores, but because of generals who should not have been generals, who were generals not through training in contemporary methods or aptitude for learning them, but by the divine right to say, "Go there," conferred upon them by an absolute caste system, or because the generals of it never lived long enough to learn how to fight massed, cautious, accretionary battles, since they were already as obsolete as Richard or Roland or Du Guesclin, who wore plumes and cloaks lined with scarlet at 28 and 30 and 32, and captured warships with cavalry charges, but no grain, nor meat, nor bullets, who would whip 3 separate armies in as many days, and then tear down their own fences to cook meat robbed from their own smokehouses, who on one night and with a handful of men would gallantly set fire to and destroy a $1 million garrison of enemy supplies, and on the next night be discovered by a neighbor in bed with his wife and be shot to death. 2, 4, now 2 again, according to Quentin and Shreve, the 2, the 4, the 2, still talking, the one who did not yet know what he was going to do, the other who knew what he would have to do, yet could not reconcile himself. Henry citing himself authority for incest, talking about his Duke John of Lorraine as if he hoped possibly to evoke that condemned and excommunicated shade to tell him in person that it was all right, as people both before and since have tried to evoke God or devil to justify them in what their glands insisted upon. The 2, the 4, the 2, facing one another in the tomb-like room, Shreve the Canadian, the child of blizzards and of cold, in a bathrobe with an overcoat above it, the collar turned up about his ears. Quentin the Southerner, the morose and delicate offspring of rain and steamy heat in the thin, suitable clothing which he had brought from Mississippi, his overcoat, as thin and vain for what it was as the suit, lying on the floor where he had not even bothered to raise it. The winter of '64 now. The army retreated across Alabama into Georgia. Now Carolina was just at their backs, and Bond, the officer, thinking, "We will either be caught and annihilated, or old Joe will extricate us, and we will make contact with Lee in front of Richmond, and then we will at least have the privilege of surrender." And then one day, all of a sudden, he thought of it, remembered how that Jefferson regiment, of which his father was now colonel, was in Longstreet's corps. And maybe from that moment, the whole purpose of the retreat seemed to him to be that of bringing him within reach of his father, to give his father one more chance, so that it must have seemed to him now that he knew at last why he had not been able to decide what he wanted to do. Maybe he thought for just a second, "My God, I am still young. Even after these 4 years, I am still young." But just for a second, because maybe in the same breath he said, "All right, then I am young. But I still believe, even though what I believe is probably that war, suffering, these 4 years of keeping his men alive and able, in order to swap them blood and flesh for the largest amount of ground at its bargain price, will have changed him, which I know that it does not do, to where he will say to me, not, 'Forgive me,' but, 'You are my oldest son. Protect your sister. Never see either of us again.'" Then it was '64, and what was left of the Army of the West, with nothing remaining now but the ability to walk backwards slow and stubborn, and to endure musketry and shelling. Maybe they didn't even miss the shoes and overcoats and food any more now, and that was why he could write about the captured stove polish like he did in the letter to Judith when he finally knew what he was going to do at last. and told Henry, and Henry said, thank God, thank God. Not for the incest, of course, but because at last they were going to do something. At last he could be something, even though that something was the irrevocable repudiation of the old heredity and training and the acceptance of eternal damnation. Maybe he could even quit talking about his Lorraine Duke then, because he could say now, it isn't yours nor his nor the Pope's hell that we are all going to. It's my mother's, and her mother's and father's, and their mothers and fathers' hell. And it isn't you who are going there, but we, the the 4 of us. And so at least we will all be together where we belong, since even if only he went there, we would still have to be there too, since the 3 of us are just illusions that he begot. And your illusions are a part of you, like your bones and flesh and memory, and we will all be together in torment, and so we will not need to remember love and fornication, and maybe in torment you cannot even remember why you are there. And if we cannot remember all this, it can't be much torment. Then they were in Carolina that January and February of '65, and what was left of them had been walking backward for almost a year now, and the distance between them and Richmond was less far than the distance they had come. The distance between them and the end a good deal less far. But to Bon it was not the space between them and defeat, but the space between him and the other regiment, between him and the hour, the moment. He will not even have to ask me. I will just touch flesh with him, and I will say it myself. You will not need to worry. She shall never see me again. Then March in Carolina, and still the walking backwards, slow and stubborn, and listening to the northward now, because there was nothing to hear from any other direction, because in all the other directions it was finished now, and all they expected to hear from the north was defeat. Then one day, he was an officer, he would have known, heard, that Lee had detached some troops and sent them down to reinforce them. Perhaps he even knew the names and numbers of the regiments before they arrived. He saw Sutpen. Maybe that first time Sutpen actually did not see him. Maybe that first time he could tell himself that was why he didn't see me, so that he had to put himself in Sutpen's way, make his chance and situation. Then for the second time he looked at the expressionless and rock-like face, at the pale, boring eyes in which there was no flicker, nothing, the face in which he saw his own features, in which he saw recognition, and that was all. That was all. There was nothing further now. Perhaps he just breathed once quietly, with on his own face that expression which might at a glance have been called smiling, while he thought, I could force him. I could go to him and force him, knowing that he would not, because it was all finished now. That was all of it now, and at last. And maybe it was that same night, or maybe a night a week later, while they were stopped, because even Sherman would have to stop sometimes at night, with the fires burning for warmth at least, because at least warmth is cheap and doesn't remain consumed, that Bond said, Henry, and said, it won't be much longer now, and then there won't be anything left. We won't even have anything to do left, not even the privilege of walking backwards slowly for a reason, for the sake of honor and what's left of pride. Not God. Evidently we have done without him for 4 years. Only he just didn't think to notify us. And not only not shoes and clothing, but not even any need for them. And not only no land, nor any way to make food, but no need for the food, since we have learned to live without that too. And so if you don't have God, and you don't need food and clothes and shelter, there isn't anything for honor and pride to climb on and hold to and flourish. And if you haven't got honor and pride, then nothing matters. Only there is something in you that doesn't care about honor and pride, yet that lives, that even walks backward for a whole year just to live, that probably even when this is over, and there is not even defeat left, will still decline to sit still in the sun and die, but will be out in the woods, moving and seeking where just will and endurance could not move it, grubbing for roots and such. The old mindless, sentient, undreaming meat that doesn't even know any difference between despair and victory. Henry, and then Henry would begin to say, "Thank God, panting and saying, "Thank God," saying, "Don't try to explain it, just do it." And Bon, "You authorize me? As her brother, you give me permission?" And Henry, "Brother? Brother? You are the oldest. Why do you ask me?" And Bon, "No, he has never acknowledged me. He just warned me. You are the brother and the son. Do I have your permission, Henry?" And Henry, "Write, write, write." So Bon wrote the letter after the 4 years, and Henry read it and sent it off. But they didn't quit then and follow the letter. They still walked backward, slow and stubborn, listening toward the north for the end of it, because it takes an awful lot of character to quit anything when you are losing. And they had been walking backward slow for a year now, so all they had left was not the will, but just the ability, the grooved habit to endure. Then one night they had stopped again, since Sherman had stopped again, and an orderly came along the bivouac line and found Henry at last and said, "Sutpen, the colonel wants you in his tent." "And so you and the old dame, the Aunt Rosa, went out there that night, and the old nigger Clytie tried to stop her. She held your arm and said, 'Don't let her go up there, young master.' But you couldn't stop her either, because she was strong with 43 years of hate, like 43 years of raw meat. And all Clytie had was just 45 or 50 years of despair and waiting. And you didn't even want to be there at all to begin with. And you couldn't stop her either. And then you saw that Clytie's trouble wasn't anger nor even distrust. It was terror, fear. And she didn't tell you in so many words because she was still keeping that secret for the sake of the man who had been her father, too, as well as for the sake of the family which no longer existed, whose heretofore inviolate and rotten mausoleum she still guarded. Didn't tell you in so many words any more than she told you in so many words how she had been in the room that day when they brought Bon's body in and Judith took from his pocket the metal case she had given him with her picture in it. She didn't tell you. It just came out of the terror and the fear after she turned you loose and caught the Aunt Rosa's arm, and the Aunt Rosa turned and struck her hand away and went on to the stairs, and Clytie ran at her again. And this time the Aunt Rosa stopped and turned on the second step and knocked Clytie down with her fist like a man would, and turned and went on up the stairs. And Clytie lay there on the floor, more than 80 years old, and not much more than 5 feet tall, and looking like a little bundle of clean rags, so that you went and took her arm and helped her up, and her arm felt like a stick, as light and dry and brittle as a stick. And she looked at you, and you saw it was not rage, but terror, and not nigger terror, because it was not about herself, but was about whatever it was that was upstairs, that she had kept hidden up there for almost 4 years. And she didn't tell you in the actual words, because even in the terror she kept the secret. Nevertheless, she told you, or at least all of a sudden you knew. He ceased again. It was just as well, since he had no listener. Perhaps he was aware of it. Then suddenly he had no talker either, though possibly he was not aware of this, because now neither of them was there. They were both in Carolina, and the time was 46 years ago, and it was not even 4 now, but compounded still further. Still, now both of them were Henry Sutpen, and both of them were Bon, compounded each of both, yet either neither, smelling the very smoke which had blown and faded away 46 years ago from the bivouac fires burning in a pine grove, the gaunt and ragged men sitting or lying about them, talking not about the war, yet all curiously enough, or perhaps not curiously at all, facing the south, where further on in the darkness the pickets stood, the pickets who, watching to the south, could see the flicker and gleam of the Federal bivouac fires, myriad and faint, and encircling half the horizon, and counting 10 fires for each Confederate one, and between whom and which, rebel picket and Yankee fire, the Yankee outposts watched the darkness also, the 2 picket lines so close that each could hear the challenge of the other's officers passing from post to post and dying away, and when gone, the voice invisible, cautious, not loud, yet carrying, "Hey, Reb! Yeah? Where are you fellers going?" "Richmond." "So are we. Why not wait for us?" "We hear." The men about the fires would not hear this exchange, though they would presently hear the orderly plainly enough as he passes from fire to fire, asking for Sutpen and being directed on, and so reaches the fire at last, the smoldering log, with his monotonous speech, "Sutpen, I'm looking for Sutpen," until Henry sits up and says, "Here." He is gaunt and ragged and unshaven, because of the last 4 years, and because he had not quite got his height when the 4 years began. He is not as tall by 2 inches as he gave promise of being, and not as heavy by 30 pounds as he probably will be a few years after he has outlived the 4 years, if he do outlive them. "Here," he says, "what is it?" "The colonel wants you." The orderly does not return with him. Instead, he walks alone through the darkness along a rutted road, a road rutted and cut and churned where the guns have passed over it that afternoon, and reaches the tent at last, one of the few tents, the canvas wall gleaming faintly from a candle within, the silhouette of a sentry before it who challenges him. "Sutpen," Henry says, "the colonel sent for me." The sentry gestures him into the tent. He stoops through the entrance. The canvas falls behind him as someone, the only occupant of the tent, rises from a camp chair behind the table on which the candle sits, his shadow swooping high and huge up the canvas wall. He, Henry, comes to salute, facing a gray sleeve with colonel's braid on it, one bearded cheek, a jutting nose, a shaggy droop of iron-riddled hair, a face which Henry does not recognize, not because he has not seen it in 4 years and does not expect to see it here and now, but rather because he is not looking at it. He just salutes the braided cuff, and stands so until the other says, "Henry." Even now Henry does not start. He just stands so. The 2 of them stand so, looking at one another. It is the older man who moves first, though they meet in the center of the tent where they embrace and kiss before Henry is aware that he has moved, was going to move, moved by what of close blood, which in the reflex instant arrogates and reconciles, even though it does not yet, perhaps never will, forgive, who stands now while his father holds his face between both hands, looking at it. "Henry," Sutpen says, "my son." Then they sit, one on either side of the table, in the chairs reserved for officers. The table, an open map lies on it, and the candle between them. "You were hit at Shiloh, Colonel Willow tells me," Sutpen says. "Yes, sir," Henry says. He is about to say Charles carried me back, but he does not, because already he knows what is coming. He does not even think, surely Judith didn't write him about that letter, or it was Clytie who sent him word somehow that Charles has written her. He thinks neither of these. To him it is logical and natural that their father should know of his and Bond's decision, that rapport of blood which should bring Bond to decide to write, himself to agree to it, and their father to know of it at the same identical instant, after a period of 4 years, out of all time. Now it does come, almost exactly as he had known that it will. "I have seen Charles Bond, Henry." Henry says nothing. It is coming now. He says nothing. He merely stares at his father, the two of them in leaf-faded gray, a single candle, a crude tent walling them away from a darkness where alert pickets face one another, and where weary men sleep without shelter, waiting for dawn and the firing, the weary backward walking to commence again. Yet in a second, tent, candle, gray, and all are gone, and it is the holly-decked Christmas library at Sutpin's 100 4 years ago, and the table not a camp table suitable for the spreading of maps, but the heavy carved rosewood one at home, with the group photograph of his mother and sister and himself sitting upon it, his father behind the table, and behind his father the window above the garden where Judith and Bond strolled in that slow rhythm where the heart matches the footsteps, and the eyes need only look at one another. "You are going to let him marry Judith, Henry?" Still Henry does not answer. It has all been said before, and now he has had 4 years of bitter struggle following which, whether it be victory or defeat which he has gained, at least he has gained it, and has peace now, even if the peace be mostly despair. "He cannot marry her, Henry." Now Henry speaks. "You said that before. I told you then, and now it won't be much longer now, and then we won't have anything left, honor, nor pride, nor God, since God quit us 4 years ago, only he never thought it necessary to tell us. No shoes nor clothes, and no need for them. Not only no land to make food out of, but no need for the food. And when you don't have God and honor and pride, nothing matters except that there is the old mindless meat that don't even care if it was defeat or victory, that won't even die, that will be out in the woods and fields, grubbing up roots and weeds. Yes, I have decided. Brother or not, I have decided. I will. I will." "He must not marry her, Henry." "Yes, I said yes at first, but I was not decided then. I didn't let him. But now I have had 4 years to decide in. I will. I am going to." "He must not marry her, Henry. His mother's father told me that her mother had been a Spanish woman. I believed him. It was not until after he was born that I found out that his mother was part Negro." Nor did Henry ever say that he did not remember leaving the tent. He remembers all of it. He remembers stooping through the entrance again and passing the sentry again. He remembers walking back down the cut and rutted road, stumbling in the dark among the ruts on either side of which the fires have now died to embers, so that he can barely distinguish the men sleeping on the earth about them. It must be better than 11 o'clock, he thinks, and another 8 miles tomorrow. If it were only not for those damned guns. Why doesn't old Joe give the guns to Sherman? Then we could make 20 miles a day. We could join Lee then. At least Lee stops and fights some of the time. He remembers it. He remembers how he did not return to his fire, but stopped presently in a lonely place and leaned against a pine, leaning quietly and easily with his head back so he could look up at the shabby, shaggy branches like something in wrought iron spreading motionless against the chill, vivid stars of early spring, thinking, I hope he remembers to thank Colonel Willow for letting us use his tent, thinking not what he would do, but what he would have to do, because he knew what he would do. It now depended on what Bon would do, would force him to do, since he knew that he would do it. So I must go to him, he thought, thinking. Now it is better than 2 o'clock, and it will be dawn soon. Then it was dawn, or almost, and it was cold. A chill which struck through the worn, patched, thin clothing, through the something of weariness and undernourishment, the passive ability, not the volitional will, to endure. There was light somewhere, enough of it for him to distinguish Bon's sleeping face from among the others, where he lay wrapped in his blanket, beneath his spread cloak, enough light for him to wake Bon by, and for Bon to distinguish his face, or perhaps something communicated by Henry's hand, because Bon does not speak, demand to know who it is. He merely rises and puts the cloak about his shoulders and approaches the smoldering fire, and is kicking it into a blaze when Henry speaks. Wait. Bon pauses and looks at Henry. Now he can see Henry's face. He says, "You will be cold. You are cold now. You haven't been asleep, have you? Here." He swings the cloak from his shoulders and holds it out. "No," Henry says. "Yes, take it. I'll get my blanket." Bon puts the cloak about Henry and goes and takes up his tumbled blanket and swings it about his shoulders. And they move aside and sit on a log. Now it is dawn. The east is gray. It will be primrose soon, and then red with firing, and once more the weary backward marching will begin, retreating from annihilation, falling back upon defeat, though not quite yet. There will be a little time yet for them to sit side by side upon the log in the making light of dawn, the one in the cloak, the other in the blanket. Their voices are not much louder than the silent dawn itself. So it's the miscegenation, not the incest, which you can't bear. Henry doesn't answer. And he sent me no word. He did not ask you to send me to him. No word to me, no word at all. That was all he had to do now, today. 4 years ago, or at any time during the 4 years, that was all. He would not have needed to ask it, require it of me. I would have offered it. I would have said, "I will never see her again," before he could have asked it of me. He did not have to do this, Henry. He didn't need to tell you I am a nigger to stop me. He could have stopped me without that, Henry. "No," Henry cries. "No, no. I'll..." He springs up. His face is working. Bon can see his teeth within the soft beard which covers his sunken cheeks, and the whites of Henry's eyes, as though the eyeballs struggled in their sockets, as the panting breath struggled in his lungs. The panting which ceased, the breath held, the eyes, too, looking down at him where he sat on the log. The voice now not much louder than an expelled breath. "You said could have stopped you. What do you mean by that?" Now it is Bon who does not answer, who sits on the log looking at the face stooped above him. Henry says, still in that voice no louder than breathing, "But now, you mean you..." "Yes. What else can I do now? I gave him the choice. I have been giving him the choice for 4 years. Think of her, not of me, of her. I have, for 4 years, of you and her. Now I am thinking of myself." "No," Henry says. "No, no." "I cannot. You shall not." "Who will stop me, Henry?" "No," Henry says. "No, no, no." Now it is Bon who watches Henry. He can see the whites of Henry's eyes again as he sits looking at Henry with that expression which might be called smiling. His hand vanishes beneath the blanket and reappears, holding his pistol by the barrel, the butt extended toward Henry. "Then do it now," he says. Henry looks at the pistol. Now he is not only panting, he is trembling. When he speaks now, his voice is not even the exhalation. It is the suffused and suffocating in-breath itself. "You are my brother." "No, I'm not. I'm the nigger that's going to sleep with your sister. Unless you stop me, Henry." Suddenly, Henry grasps the pistol, jerks it free of Bond's hand, and stands so, the pistol in his hand, panting and panting. Again Henry, with that faint expression about the eyes and mouth which might be smiling, Henry whirls. In the same motion he hurls the pistol from him and "Shall not," he says. "You shall not do, you hear me?" Bond does not move beneath the gripping hands. He sits motionless, first breath in which the pine branches begin to move a little. "You will have to stop me, Henry." "And he never slipped away," Shreve said. "He could have, but he never even tried. Jesus, maybe he even went to Henry and said, 'I'm going, Henry,' and maybe they left together and rode side by side, dodging Yankee patrols all the way back to Mississippi and right up to that gate, side by side, and it only then that one of them ever rode ahead or dropped behind, and that when Henry spurred ahead and turned his horse to face Bond and took out the pistol, and Judith and Clytie heard the shot, and maybe Wash Jones was hanging around somewhere in the backyard, and so he was there to help Clytie and Judith carry him into the house and lay him on the bed, and Wash went to town to tell the Aunt Rosa, and the Aunt Rosa comes boiling out that afternoon and finds Judith standing without a tear before the closed door, holding the metal case she had given him with her picture in it, but that didn't have her picture in it now, but that of the octoroon and the kid, and your old man wouldn't know about that, too. Why the black son of a bitch should have taken her picture out and put the octoroon's picture in. So he invented a reason for it. But I know, and you know, too, don't you? Don't you, huh?" He glared at Quentin, leaning forward over the table now, looking huge and shapeless as a bear in his swaddling of garments. "Don't you know? It was because he said to himself, 'If Henry don't mean what he said, it will be all right. I can take it out and destroy it. But if he does mean what he said, it will be the only way I will have to say to her, I was no good. Do not grieve for me.' Ain't that right, ain't it? By God, ain't it?" "Yeah," Quentin said. "Come on," Shreve said. "Let's get out of this refrigerator and go to bed." Chapter 9, the last chapter. At first, in bed, in the dark, it seemed colder than ever, as if there had been some puny quality of faint heat in the single light bulb before Shreve turned it off, and that now the iron and impregnable dark had become one with the iron and ice-like bedclothing lying upon the flesh, slacked and thin-clad for sleeping. Then the darkness seemed to breathe, to flow back. The window which Shreve had opened became visible against the faintly unearthly glow of the outer snow as, forced by the weight of the darkness, the blood surged and ran warmer, warmer. "University of Mississippi," Shreve's voice said in the darkness to Quentin's right. "Bayard attenuated 40 miles. It was 40 miles, wasn't it? Out of the wilderness, proud, honor, semesterial, regurgitant." "Yes," Quentin said. "They were in the 10th graduating class since it was founded." "I didn't know there were 10 in Mississippi that went to school at one time," Shreve said. Quentin didn't answer. He lay watching the rectangle of window, feeling the warming blood driving through his veins, his arms and legs. And now, although he was warm, and though while he had sat in the cold room he merely shook faintly and steadily, now he began to jerk all over, violently and uncontrollably, until he could even hear the bed, until even Shreve felt it and turned, raising himself by the sound onto his elbow to look at Quentin, though Quentin himself felt perfectly all right. He felt fine, even, lying there and waiting in peaceful curiosity for the next violent, unharbingered jerk to come. "Jesus, are you that cold?" Shreve said. "Do you want me to spread the overcoats on you?" "No," Quentin said. "I'm not cold. I'm all right. I feel fine." "Then what are you doing that for?" "I don't know. I can't help it. I feel fine." "All right. But let me know if you want the coats." Jesus, if I was going to have to spend 9 months in this climate, I would sure hate to have come from the south. Maybe I wouldn't have come from the south anyway if I could stay there. Wait. Listen. I'm not trying to be funny, smart. I just want to understand it if I can, and I don't know how to say it better. Because it's something my people haven't got, or if we have got it, it all happened long ago across the water. So now there ain't anything to look at every day to remind us of it. We don't live among defeated grandfathers and freed slaves, or have I got it backward? And was it your folks that are free and the niggers that lost? And bullets in the dining room table and such, to be always reminding us to never forget. What is it? Something you live and breathe in like air? A kind of vacuum filled with wraith-like and indomitable anger and pride and glory at and in happenings that occurred and ceased 50 years ago? A kind of entailed birthright father and son of never-forgiving General Sherman, so that forevermore, as long as your children's children produce children, you won't be anything but a descendant of a long line of colonels killed in Pickett's charge at Manassas? Gettysburg, Quentin said. You can't understand it. You would have to be born there. Would I, then? Quentin did not answer. Do you understand it? I don't know, Quentin said. Yes, of course I understand it. They breathed in the darkness. After a moment, Quentin said, I don't know. Yes, you don't know. You don't even know about the old dame, the Aunt Rosa. Miss Rosa, Quentin said. All right, you don't even know about her, except that she refused at the last to be a ghost, that after almost 50 years she couldn't reconcile herself to letting him lie dead in peace, that even after 50 years she not only could get up and go out there to finish up what she found she hadn't quite completed, but she could find someone to go with her and bust into that locked house because instinct or something told her it was not finished yet. Do you? No, Quentin said peacefully. He could taste the dust. Even now, with the chill, pure weight of the snow-breathed New England air on his face, he could taste and feel the dust of that breathless, rather furnace-breathed Mississippi September night. He could even smell the old woman in the buggy beside him, smell the fusty, camphor-reeking shawl, and even the airless black cotton umbrella in which, he would not discover until they had reached the house, she had concealed a hatchet and a flashlight. He could smell the horse. He could hear the dry plaint of the light wheels in the weightless, permeant dust. And he seemed to feel the dust itself move, sluggish and dry, across his sweating flesh, just as he seemed to hear the single profound suspiration of the parched earth's agony, rising toward the imponderable and aloof stars. Now she spoke, for the first time since they had left Jefferson, since she had climbed into the buggy, with a kind of clumsy and fumbling and trembling eagerness, which he thought derived from terror, alarm, until he found that he was quite wrong, before he could help her to sit on the extreme edge of the seat, small in the fusty shawl and clutching the umbrella, leaning forward, as if by leaning forward she would arrive the sooner, arrive immediately after the horse, and before he, Quentin, would, before the prescience of her desire and need could warn its consummation. "Now," she said, "we are on the domain, on his land, his and Ellen's descendants. They have taken it away from them since, I understand, but it still belongs to him, to Ellen and her descendants." But Quentin was already aware of that. Before she spoke, he had said to himself, "Now, now," and as during the long, hot afternoon in the dim, hot little house, it seemed to him that if he stopped the buggy and listened, he might even hear the galloping hooves. Before she spoke, he had said to himself, "Now, now," and as during the long, hot afternoon in the dim, hot little house, it seemed to him that if he stopped the buggy and listened, he might even hear the galloping hooves, might even see at any moment now the black stallion and the rider rush across the road before them and gallop on, the rider who at one time owned, lock, stock, and barrel, everything he could see from a given point, with every stick and blade and hoof and heel on it to remind him, if he ever forgot it, that he was the biggest thing in their sight, and in his own, too, who went to war to protect it, and lost the war, and returned home to find that he had lost more than the war even, though not absolutely all, who said, "At least I have life left," but did not have life, but only old age and breathing and horror and scorn and fear and indignation. And all remaining to look at him with unchanged regard was the girl who had been a child when he saw her last, who doubtless used to watch him from window or door as he passed unaware of her, as she would have looked at God, probably, since everything else within her view belonged to him too. Maybe he would even stop at the cabin and ask for water, and she would take the bucket and walk the mile and back to the spring to fetch it fresh and cool for him, no more thinking of saying, "The bucket is empty," to him than she would have said it to God. This the not all, since at least there was breathing left. Now Quentin began to breathe hard again, who had been peaceful for a time in the warm bed, breathing hard the heady, pure, snow-born darkness. She, Miss Coldfield, did not let him enter the gate. She said, "Stop," suddenly. He felt her hand flutter on his arm, and he thought, "Why, she is afraid." He could hear her panting now, her voice almost a wail of diffident yet iron determination. "I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." "I do," he thought. "Go back to town and go to bed." But he did not say it. He looked at the two huge rotting gate-posts in the starlight, between which no gates swung now, wondering from what direction Bon and Henry had ridden up that day, wondering what had cast the shadow which Bon was not to pass alive. If some living tree which still lived and bore leaves and shed, or if some tree gone, vanished, burned for warmth and food years ago now, or perhaps just gone, or if it had been one of the two posts themselves, thinking, wishing that Henry were there now to stop Miss Coldfield and turn them back, telling himself that if Henry were there now, there would be no shot to be heard by anyone. "She's going to try to stop me," Miss Coldfield whimpered. "I know she is. Maybe this far from town, out here, alone at midnight, she will even let that Negro man. And you didn't even bring a pistol, did you?" "No'm," Quentin said. "What is it she's got hidden there? What could it be? And what difference does it make? Let's go back to town, Miss Rosa." She didn't answer this at all. She just said, "That's what I have got to find out," sitting forward on the seat, trembling now and peering up the tree-arched drive toward where the rotting shell of the house would be. And now I will have to find it out, she whimpered in a kind of amazed self-pity. She moved suddenly. Come, she whispered, beginning to get out of the buggy. Wait, Quentin said. Let's drive up to the house. It's half a mile. No, no, she whispered. A tense, fierce hissing of words filled with that same curious, terrified, yet implacable determination, as though it were not she who had to go and find out, but she only the helpless agent of someone or something else who must know. Hitch the horse here. Hurry. She got out, scrambled awkwardly down before he could help her, clutching the umbrella. It seemed to him that he could still hear her whimpering, panting, where she waited close beside one of the posts, while he led the mare from the road and tied one rein about a sapling in the weed-choked ditch. He could not see her at all, so close she stood against the post. She just stepped out and fell in beside him when he passed, and turned into the gate, still breathing in those whimpering pants as they walked on up the rutted, tree-arched drive. The darkness was intense. She stumbled. He caught her. She took his arm, clutching it in a dead, rigid, hard grip, as if her fingers, her hand, were a small mass of wire. I will have to take your arm, she whispered, whimpered, and you haven't even got a pistol. Wait, she said. She stopped. He turned. He could not see her, but he could hear her hurried breathing, and then a rustling of cloth. Then she was prodding something at him. Here, she whispered. Take it. It was a hatchet. Not sight, but touch told him. A hatchet with a heavy, worn handle and a heavy, gapped, rust-dulled blade. What? He said. Take it, she whispered, hissed. You didn't bring a pistol. It's something. Here, he said. Wait. Come, she whispered. You will have to let me take your arm. I'm trembling so bad. They went on again, she clinging to one of his arms, the hatchet in his other hand. We will probably need it to get into the house anyway, she said, stumbling along beside him, almost dragging him. I know she is somewhere watching us, she whimpered. I can feel her. But if we can just get to the house, get into the house. The drive seemed interminable. He knew the place. He had walked from the gate to the house as a child, a boy, when distances seem really long, so that to the man grown, the long, crowded mile of his boyhood becomes less than the throw of a stone. Yet now it seemed to him that the house would never come in sight, so that presently he found himself repeating her words, if we can just get to the house, get inside the house, telling himself, recovering himself in that same breath, I am not afraid. I just don't want to be here. I just don't want to know about whatever it is she keeps hidden in it. But they reached it at last. It loomed, bulked, square and enormous, with jagged, half-toppled chimneys, its roof line sagging a little. For an instant, as they moved, hurried toward it, Quentin saw completely through it, a ragged segment of sky with 3 hot stars in it, as if the house were of one dimension, painted on a canvas curtain in which there was a tear. Now, almost beneath it, the dead furnace breath of air in which they moved seemed to reek in slow and protracted violence, with a smell of desolation and decay, as if the wood of which it was built were flesh. She was trotting beside him now, her hand trembling on his arm, yet gripping it still with that lifeless and rigid strength, not talking, not saying words, yet producing a steady whimpering, almost a moaning sound. Apparently she could not see at all now, so that he had to guide her toward where he knew the steps would be, and then restrain her, whispering, hissing, aping, without knowing it, her own tense, fainting haste. "Wait! This way! Be careful now, they're rotten!" He almost lifted, carried her up the steps, supporting her from behind by both elbows. As you lift a child, he could feel something fierce and implacable and dynamic driving down the thin, rigid arms and into his palms and up his own arms. Lying in the Massachusetts bed, he remembered how he thought, knew, said suddenly to himself, "Why, she's not afraid at all. It's something, but she's not afraid." Feeling her flee out of his hands, hearing her feet cross the gallery, overtaking her where she now stood beside the invisible front door, panting. "Now what?" he whispered. "Break it," she whispered. "It will be locked, nailed. You have the hatchet, break it." "But," he began. "Break it," she hissed. "It belongs to Ellen. I am her sister, her only living heir. Break it. Hurry." He pushed against the door. It did not move. She panted beside him. "Hurry," she said. "Break it." "Listen, Miss Rosa," he said. "Listen. Give me the hatchet." "Wait," he said. "Do you really want to go inside?" "I'm going inside," she whimpered. "Give me the hatchet." "Wait," he said. He moved along the gallery, guiding himself by the wall, moving carefully since he did not know just where the floor planks might be rotten or even missing, until he came to a window. The shutters were closed and apparently locked, yet they gave almost at once to the blade of the hatchet, making not very much sound. A flimsy and sloven barricading, done either by an old feeble person, woman, or by a shiftless man. He had already inserted the hatchet blade beneath the sash before he discovered that there was no glass in it, that all he had to do now was to step through the vacant frame. Then he stood there for a moment, telling himself to go on in, telling himself that he was not afraid. He just didn't want to know what might be inside. "Well," Miss Coldfield whispered from the door, "have you opened it?" "Yes," he said. He did not whisper, though he did not speak over loud. The dark room which he faced repeated his voice with hollow profundity, as an unfurnished room will. "You wait there. I'll see if I can open the door." So now I shall have to go in, he thought, climbing over the sill. He knew that the room was empty. The echo of his voice had told him that, yet he moved as slowly and carefully here as he had along the gallery, feeling along the wall with his hand, following the wall when it turned, and found the door, and passed through it. He would be in the hall now. He almost believed that he could hear Miss Coldfield breathing just beyond the wall beside him. It was pitch dark. He could not see. He knew that he could not see. Yet he found that his eyelids and muscles were aching with strain, while merging and dissolving red spots wheeled and vanished across the retinae. He went on. He felt the door under the hand at last, and now he could hear Miss Coldfield's whimpering breathing beyond it as he fumbled for the lock. Then, behind him, the sound of the scraped match was like an explosion, a pistol. Even before the puny following light appeared, all his organs lifted sickeningly. He could not even move for a moment, even though something of sanity roared silently inside his skull. "It's all right. If it were danger, he would not have struck the match." Then he could move, and turned to see the tiny, gnome-like creature in head rag and voluminous skirts, the worn, coffee-colored face staring at him, the match held in one coffee-colored and doll-like hand above her head. Then he was not watching her, but watching the match as it burned down toward her fingers. He watched quietly as she moved at last and lit a second match from the first, and turned. He saw then the square-ended saw chunk beside the wall. and the lamp sitting upon it. As she lifted the chimney and held the match to the wick, he remembered it, lying here in the Massachusetts bed and breathing fast now that peace and quiet had fled again. He remembered how she did not say one word to him, not "Who are you?" or "What do you want here?" but merely came with a bunch of enormous old-fashioned iron keys, as if she had known all the time that this hour must come, and that it could not be resisted, and opened the door and stepped back a little as Miss Coldfield entered, and how she, Clytie, and Miss Coldfield said no word to one another, as if Clytie had looked once at the other woman and knew that that would do no good, that it was to him, Quentin, that she turned, putting her hand on his arm and saying, "Don't let her go up there, young master," and how maybe she looked at him and knew that would do no good either, because she turned and overtook Miss Coldfield and caught her arm and said, "Don't you go up there, Rosie," and Miss Coldfield struck the hand away and went on toward the stairs, and now he saw that she had a flashlight. He remembered how he thought it must have been in the umbrella, too, along with the axe. And Clytie said, "Rosie," and ran after the other again, whereupon Miss Coldfield turned on the step and struck Clytie to the floor with a full-armed blow, like a man would have, and turned and went on up the stairs. She, Clytie, lay on the bare floor of the scaling and empty hall like a small, shapeless bundle of quiet, clean rags. When he reached her, he saw that she was quite conscious, her eyes wide open and calm. He stood above her thinking, yes, she is the one who owns the terror. When he raised her, it was like picking up a handful of sticks concealed in a rag bundle, so light she was. She could not stand. He had to hold her up, aware of some feeble movement or intention in her limbs, until he realized that she was trying to sit on the bottom step. He lowered her to it. "Who are you?" she said. "I'm Quentin Thompson," he answered. "Yes, I remember your grandpa. You go up there and make her come down. Make her go away from here. Whatever he done, me and Judith and him have paid it out. You go and get her. Take her away from here." So he mounted the stairs, the worn, bare treads, the cracked and scaling wall on one side, the balustrade with its intermittent missing spindles on the other. He remembered how he looked back, and she was still sitting as he had left her, and that now, and he had not heard him enter, there stood in the hall below a hulking young light-colored Negro man in clean faded overalls and shirt, his arms dangling, no surprise, no nothing in the saddle-colored and slack-mouthed idiot face. He remembered how he thought, the scion, the heir, the apparent, though not obvious, and how he heard Miss Coldfield's feet and saw the light of the torch approaching along the upper hall, and how she came and passed him, how she stumbled a little and caught herself and looked full at him as if she had never seen him before, the eyes wide and unseeing like a sleepwalker's, the face which had always been tallow-hued, now possessing some still profounder, some almost unbearable quality of bloodlessness. And he thought, what? What is it now? It's not shock, and it has never been fear. Can it be triumph? And how she passed him and went on. He heard Clytie say to the man, "Take her to the gate, the buggy." And he stood there thinking, I should go with her. And then, but I must see too now. I will have to. Maybe I shall be sorry tomorrow, but I must see. So when he came back down the stairs, and he remembered how he thought, maybe my face looks like hers did, but it's not triumph. There was only Clytie in the hall, sitting still on the bottom step, sitting still in the attitude in which he had left her. She did not even look at him when he passed her, nor did he overtake Miss Coldfield and the Negro. It was too dark to go fast, though he could presently hear them ahead of him. She was not using the flashlight now. He remembered how he thought, surely she can't be afraid to show a light now. But she was not using it, and he wondered if she were holding to the Negro's arm now. He wondered that until he heard the Negro's voice, flat, without emphasis or interest. "Walking better over here," and no answer from her, though he was close enough now to hear, or believe he did, her whimpering, panting breath. Then he heard the other sound, and he knew that she had stumbled and fallen. He could almost see the hulking, slack-faced Negro stopped in his tracks, looking toward the sound of the fall, waiting, without interest or curiosity, as he, Quentin, hurried forward, hurried toward the voices. "You, nigger, what's your name?" "Calls me Jim Bond." "Help me up. You ain't any suckpin. You don't have to leave me lying in the dirt." When he stopped the buggy at her gate, she did not offer to get out alone this time. She sat there until he got down and came around to her side. She still sat there, clutching the umbrella in one hand and the hatchet in the other, until he spoke her name. Then she stirred. He helped, lifted her down. She was almost as light as Clytie had been. When she moved, it was like a mechanical doll, so that he supported and led her through the gate and up the short walk and into the doll-sized house, and turned on the light for her and looked at the fixed, sleepwalking face, the wide, dark eyes as she stood there, still clutching the umbrella and the hatchet, the shawl and the black dress both stained with dirt where she had fallen, the black bonnet jerked forward and awry by the shock of the fall. "Are you all right now?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'm all right. Good night." Not thank you, he thought, just good night. Outside the house now, breathing deep and fast now as he returned to the buggy, finding that he was about to begin to run, thinking quietly, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus," breathing fast and hard of the dark, dead furnace breath of air, of night where the fierce, aloof stars hung. His own home was dark. He was still using the whip when he turned into the lane and then into the stable lot. He sprang out and took the mare from the buggy, stripping the harness from her and tumbling it into the harness room without stopping to hang it up. Sweating, breathing fast and hard, when he turned at last toward the house, he did begin to run. He could not help it. He was 20 years old. He was not afraid, because what he had seen out there could not harm him. Yet he ran. Even inside the dark, familiar house, his shoes in his hand, he still ran up the stairs and into his room, and began to undress fast, sweating, breathing fast. "I ought to bathe," he thought. Then he was lying on the bed, naked, swabbing his body steadily with the discarded shirt, sweating still, panting, so that when, his eye muscles aching and straining into the darkness and the almost dried shirt still clutched in his hand, he said, "I have been asleep." It was all the same. There was no difference. Waking or sleeping, he walked down that upper hall between the scaling walls and beneath the cracked ceiling toward the faint light which fell outward from the last door, and paused there, saying, "No, no," and then, "Only I must, I have to," and went in, entered the bare, stale room whose shutters were closed too, where a second lamp burned dimly on a crude table. Waking or sleeping, it was the same. The bed, the yellow sheets and pillow, the wasted yellow face with closed, almost transparent eyelids on the pillow, the wasted hands crossed on the breast as if he were already a corpse. Waking or sleeping, it was the same, and would be the same forever as long as he lived. And you are Henry Sutpen. And you have been here 4 years. And you came home to die, yes. To die? Yes, to die. And you have been here 4 years. And you are Henry Sutpen. It was quite cold in the room now. The chimes would ring for 1 any time now. The chill had a compounded, a gathered quality, as though preparing for the dead moment before dawn. And she waited 3 months before she went back to get him? Shreve said. Why did she do that? Quentin didn't answer. He lay still and rigid on his back, with the cold New England night on his face, and the blood running warm in his rigid body and limbs, breathing hard but slow, his eyes wide open upon the window, thinking, never more of peace, never more of peace, never more, never more, never more. Do you suppose it was because she knew what was going to happen when she told it? Took any steps that it would be over then, finished? And that hating is like drink or drugs, and she had used it so long that she did not dare risk cutting off the supply, destroying the source, the very poppy's root and seed? Still, Quentin didn't answer. But at last she did reconcile herself to it, for his sake, to save him, to bring him into town where the doctors could save him. And so she told it then, got the ambulance and the men, and went out there, and old Clytie may be watching for just that out of the upstairs window for 3 months now, and maybe even your old man was right this time. When she saw the ambulance turn into the gate, she believed it was the same black wagon for which she probably had had that nigger boy watching for 3 months now, coming to carry Henry into town for the white folks to hang him for shooting Charles Barn. And I guess it had been him who had kept that closet under the stairs full of tinder and trash all that time, too, like she told him to. Maybe he not getting it then either, but keeping it full, just like she told him, the kerosene and all, for 3 months now, until the hour when he could begin to howl. Now the chimes began ringing for 1 o'clock. Shreve ceased, as if he were waiting for them to cease, or perhaps were even listening to them. Quentin lay still, too, as if he were listening, too, though he was not. He just heard them without listening, as he heard Shreve without listening or answering until they ceased, died away into the icy air, delicate and faint and musical as struck glass. And he, Quentin, could see that, too, though he had not been there. The ambulance with Miss Coldfield between the driver and the second man, perhaps a deputy sheriff, in the shawl, surely, and perhaps even with the umbrella, too, though probably no hatchet nor flashlight in it now, entering the gate and picking its way gingerly up the rutted and frozen and now partially thawed drive. And it may have been the howling, or it may have been the deputy or the driver, or it may have been she who cried first, "It's on fire!" Though she would not have cried that, she would have said, "Faster! Faster!" leaning forward on this seat, too. The small, furious, grim, implacable woman, not much larger than a child. But the ambulance could not go fast in that drive. Doubtless Clytie knew, counted upon that. It would be a good 3 minutes before it could reach the house. The monstrous, tinder-dry, rotten shell seeping smoke through the warped cracks in the weatherboarding, as if it were made of gauze wire, and filled with roaring, and beyond which, somewhere, something lurked which bellowed, something human, since the bellowing was in human speech, even though the reason for it would not have seemed to be. And the deputy and the driver would spring out, and Miss Coldfield would stumble out and follow them, running, too, onto the gallery, too, where the creature which bellowed followed them, wraith-like and insubstantial, looking at them out of the smoke, whereupon the deputy even turned and ran at him, whereupon he retreated, fled, though the howling did not diminish nor even seem to get any further away. They ran onto the gallery, too, into the seeping smoke, Miss Coldfield screaming harshly, "The window! The window!" to the second man at the door. But the door was not locked. It swung inward. The blast of heat struck them. The entire staircase was on fire, yet they had to hold her. Quentin could see it. The light, thin, furious creature making no sound at all now, struggling with silent and bitter fury, clawing and scratching and biting at the two men who held her, who dragged her back and down the steps as the draft created by the open door seemed to explode like powder among the flames, as the whole lower hall vanished. He, Quentin, could see it, could see the deputy holding her, while the driver backed the ambulance to safety and returned, the three faces all a little wild now, since they must have believed her, the three of them staring, glaring at the doomed house. And then, for a moment maybe, Clytie appeared in that window from which she must have been watching the gates constantly, day and night, for 3 months. The tragic gnome's face beneath the clean head rag, against a red background of fire, seen for a moment between two swirls of smoke, looking down at them, perhaps not even now with triumph, and no more of despair than it had ever worn, possibly even serene above the melting clapboards before the smoke swirled across it again. And he, Jim Bond, the scion, the last of his race, seeing it too now, and howling with human reason now, since now even he could have known what he was howling about. But they couldn't catch him. They could hear him. He didn't seem to ever get any further away, but they couldn't get any nearer, and maybe, in time, they could not even locate the direction of the howling anymore. They, the driver and the deputy, held Miss Coldfield as she struggled. He, Quentin, could see her, them. He had not been there, but he could see her, struggling and fighting like a doll in a nightmare, making no sound, foaming a little at the mouth, her face even in the sunlight lit by one last wild crimson reflection as the house collapsed and roared away, and there was only the sound of the idiot Negro left. And so it was the Aunt Rosa that came back to town inside the ambulance, Shreve said. Quentin did not answer. He did not even say, Miss Rosa. He just lay there, staring at the window without even blinking, breathing the chill, heady, pure, snow-gleamed darkness. And she went to bed because it was all finished now. There was nothing left now, nothing out there but that idiot boy to lurk around those ashes and those poor gutted chimneys and howl until someone came and drove him away. They couldn't catch him, and nobody ever seemed to make him go very far away. He just stopped howling for a little while. Then after a while they would begin to hear him again. And so she died. Quentin did not answer, staring at the window. Then he could not tell if it was the actual window or the window's pale rectangle upon his eyelids, though after a moment it began to emerge. It began to take shape in its same curious, light, gravity-defying attitude, the once-folded sheet out of the wisteria Mississippi summer, the cigar smell, the random blowing of the fireflies. "The South," Shreve said. "The South. Jesus! No wonder you folks all outlive yourselves by years and years and years." It was becoming quite distinct. He would be able to decipher the words soon, in a moment, even almost now. Now. "I am older at 20 than a lot of people who have died," Quentin said. "And more people have died than have been 21, Shreve said. Now he, Quentin, could read it, could finish it, the sloped, whimsical, ironic hand out of Mississippi attenuated into the iron snow. Or perhaps there is. Surely it can harm no one to believe that perhaps she has escaped not at all the privilege of being outraged and amazed, and of not forgiving, but on the contrary has herself gained that place or born where the objects of the outrage and of the commiseration also are no longer ghosts, but are actual people to be, actual recipients of the hatred and the pity. It will do no harm to hope. You see, I have written hope, not think. So let it be hope, that the one cannot escape the censure which no doubt he deserves, that the other no longer lack the commiseration which, let us hope while we are hoping, that they have longed for, if only for the reason that they are about to receive it whether they will or no. The weather was beautiful, though cold, and they had to use picks to break the earth for the grave, yet in one of the deeper clods I saw a redworm, doubtless alive when the clod was thrown up, though by afternoon it was frozen again. So it took Charles Bond and his mother to get rid of old Tom, and Charles Bond and the octoroon to get rid of Judith, and Charles Bond and Clytie to get rid of Henry, and Charles Bond's mother and Charles Bond's grandmother got rid of Charles Bond. So it takes 2 niggers to get rid of 1 Sutton, don't it? Quentin did not answer. Evidently, Shreve did not want an answer now. He continued almost without a pause. Which is all right, it's fine. It clears the whole ledger. You can tear all the pages out and burn them, except for one thing. And do you know what that is? Perhaps he hoped for an answer this time, or perhaps he merely paused for emphasis, since he got no answer. You've got 1 nigger left. 1 nigger Sutton left. Of course, you can't catch him, and you don't even always see him, and you never will be able to use him. But you've got him there still. You still hear him at night sometimes, don't you? Yes, Quentin said. And so do you know what I think? Now he did expect an answer, and now he got one. No, Quentin said. Do you want to know what I think? No, Quentin said. Then I'll tell you. I think that in time the Jim Bonds are going to conquer the Western Hemisphere. Of course, it won't be quite in our time, and of course, as they spread toward the poles, they will bleach out again like the rabbits and the birds do, so they won't show up so sharp against the snow. But it will still be Jim Bond. And so, in a few thousand years, I, who regard you, will also have sprung from the loins of African kings. Now, I want you to tell me just one thing more. Why do you hate the South? I don't hate it, Quentin said, quickly, at once, immediately. I don't hate it, he said. I don't hate it, he thought, panting in the cold air, the iron New England dark. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. This concludes the reading of Absalom, Absalom by William Faulkner. This book was read by Wolfram Kandinsky.